I think he's coming in right now. There's Nico right there. Nico, great to see you. Hey, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Of course, Jim. Happy to be here.
And Nico, you're with the organization FIRE, Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. And if I was just reading this correctly about you, Nico, you also host a podcast on some of these very issues in what you do. And maybe you don't want to pop off to the extent that I've been popping up, but maybe you do. But when you saw the Paramount settlement late last week, as I was saying, during a 4th of July weekend, people are out of town, they're not paying attention to the news. It just stinks. And to me, it's so much more than, oh, they paid off a Trump lawsuit. They paid a settlement in a Trump lawsuit to get it to go away. It's so much bigger than that.
Yeah, it is. We've been surprised by the scope, scale, and severity of the Trump administration's attacks on free expression in the second term. I mean, we dealt with a first Trump administration, right? And the attacks were there. But the
Yeah.
scope, scale, and severity of the second administration are unlike anything that we have seen. And we weren't totally surprised to see the settlement from Paramount in this case. They'd been signaling that it was going to happen for a long time. Shari Redstone, the owner of Paramount, had signaled that she wanted it to happen. You saw Bill Owens, the executive producer of 60 Minutes, talk about how for
Right.
the first time in his 3-decade career at 60 Minutes, he felt like the suits up top, so to speak, were telling him and his team to soften up their coverage. And we had seen pressure not just from this lawsuit that was filed in Texas by President Trump. And I should urge your listeners to check that out. It's a consumer fraud lawsuit. It's not a defamation lawsuit. It's not an
Wow.
election interference lawsuit. A lot of people have been saying, oh, this is election interference. This is election interference. This is defamation. It's none of the sort. It's consumer
Interesting.
fraud. Consumer fraud is the sort of thing where you're selling a used car and you're rolling back the odometer, right? It's not news coverage.
Yeah.
But President Trump has been putting on pressure outside the courts of law as well, including through the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, through his chairman there, Brendan Carr, who, when Brendan Carr was just had a regular seat on the FCC. He was very good on these free speech issues. Talked about how the FCC stands in the shadow of the First Amendment, so to speak, and they can't use it as a cudgel to police the news or to police
Right.
the internet. But now you have Trump on True Social talking about how Brendan Carr needs to impose maximum fines and punishment on CBS for this Kamala
Right.
Harris segment. And Brendan Carr is the guy who's walking in to administrative meetings wearing a gold lapel pin with Trump's face on it. So
Ridiculous.
if you're the general counsel or you're counsel to CBS or Paramount in this case, what do you think your chances at a fair shake is going to be?
It's like he's the
So
minister of information in a dictatorship is
yeah,
basically how he's operating. Yeah.
yeah, it's sort of a Maoist tactic. The dear leader. Let's wear the face of the dear leader
Yeah.
on our clothes. And you had Brendan Carr get asked about this. I think it was with Semaphore, and it was Ben Smith, I believe. And Ben Smith said, you're doing the same things that you criticize the Democrats for doing. What
Right.
gives? And he said, well, Democrats set this precedent. Now we're just following it. That's an excuse. That's an
Yeah.
excuse.
It's also
Uh,
bullshit. The Democrats didn't do that. I mean, no, Barack Obama wasn't filing lawsuits against major media companies and that sort of a thing. And I just, to me, I find this to be just very disturbing because you not only have the CBS case, you have the ABC case that happened earlier on this year. That's two of the three major broadcast networks that folks who are my age grew up with in this country. Fox sort of came along in the 80s and 90s, and to me, it of course is not a stretch that you would have viewers who consume these newscasts over there wondering whether or not they're on the up and up when it comes to covering the presidency, because they've already, like, as you mentioned, Bill Owens, the EP of 60 Minutes, stated very publicly that he was feeling corporate pressures. Wendy McMahon stepped down as the president of CBS News. People at CBS News did not want this to happen. The people at 60 Minutes did not want this to happen, but the parent company did it anyway. And you just have to think that Trump has these notches on his belt, and he's just going to go down the list of other. He's just going to keep going, and that's the whole problem with this. Is that, and I think you may have put this in your organization's statement, is that it creates sort of a reward and incentive structure for this nonsense.
yeah, behavior that gets
Yeah.
rewarded gets repeated.
Yeah.
And so the capitulation here by CBS, I think, is going to lead for more pressure tactics, more jawboning. That's a phrase that was in vogue during the Biden administration when they were pressuring social media companies to
Yeah.
censor. And then the Trump, on his first day in office, signs an executive order to oppose jawboning, saying we're not going to use the federal government to weaponize censorship. And then you have this happen. It's even worse than jawboning in
Yeah.
this case. The thing about the 60-minute settlement that is so mind-boggling is not just the settlement; it's just everything that happened within that 24-hour period
Yeah.
relating to free speech and the First Amendment. So you get the announcement on Friday or Thursday, I forget what day it was, that they were going to settle for $16 million with Paramount. The same day you have Trump outside on the White House lawn threatening a private citizen with prosecution or getting doged for
Right.
criticizing the bill in Congress. This is Elon Musk. You know, he's no
Yeah. He's
longer
going
in
after Elon
business.
Musk. Exactly. Yeah.
He's a private citizen. He's threatening his companies with Doge for criticizing a bill in Congress. This is core First Amendment protected activity, political speech. And he's going
Yeah.
out there and flagrantly threatening a private citizen for doing so. That same 24-hour period, you have him and Kristi Noem targeting CNN. Kristi Noem says they're going to threaten to prosecute, or they're going to look into prosecuting CNN for reporting on an ICE reporting app. This is an app that
Yeah.
lets people know where ICE is. I mean, it's kind of like your Google Maps or your Waze app that tells you where police are on the road. It's no
Yep.
different. You can report factual information on where law enforcement is, just
Yeah.
like you can report factual information about the intelligence reports about relating to Iran. Those were actual reports put out by the intelligence agencies. Trump might disagree with them, but reporting on them is factual.
Yeah.
You can
And we
report their
haven't even
existence.
no, and we haven't even talked about the Associated Press.
No.
And what's been going over at the White House. I mean, I can speak from my own experience when they took my press pass away during the first Trump administration. That was going after an individual journalist. Yes, they were going after my company at the time. And yes, they were trying to put a chilling effect on the press corps in the White House by and large. That's all true. But I mean, I thought this was a very chilling precedent when we saw the White House go after the Associated Press very early on in this administration, and up until this point, they really have not had. I mean, there's been a judge I think that has agreed with the Associated Press here and there, but I mean, the Trump administration still has the ability, if I'm not mistaken, to continue to do this kind of they sort of running the show when it comes to the White House press pool and so on. And that is a very damaging set of events. I mean, it's just a very damaging series of events to take place because if you can't have the press in charge of who covers the president of the United States, then we don't really have a free press in this country.
Yeah, so the district court in that Associated Press case ruled in favor of the Associated Press, and
Right,
then
right.
it got up to the DC circuit where the DC circuit overturned the district court ruling.
Right, exactly.
Wrongfully so. I hope the Associated Press appeals up to the Supreme Court and we get this
Me
question
too.
in front of the justices. But let's recall what that case was about. That was
Yeah.
because the Associated Press refused to use Gulf of America as part
Right.
of its editorial standards.
Yeah.
They said, okay, we're going to change the name of Mount McKinley. We're going to call it Mount McKinley because that's within the territorial, borders of the United States. But we're not going to call Gulf of America because it's an international body of water bordering multiple countries, and only the United States recognizes
Right,
that
right,
name. That's an
right.
understandable editorial standard. We'll do it for Mount
Yeah.
McKinley. We're not going to do it for Gulf of America.
Yeah.
And because the Associated Press, as your listeners may know, has one of the most widely used style books in the news industry, the Trump
That's how I
administration
was
didn't like
raised in
this.
this business. When I first started in this business, editor threw the AP style book at me and said, "Memorize this." I was like, "Okay."
When I was a journalism
Yeah.
student, one of the most prestigious internships you
Yeah.
could get was with Dow Jones, and you had to take an AP style book test, or
Yeah.
maybe it was at Dow Jones, but there was a lot of overlap between the two of them. Yeah, you had to
Exactly.
learn the style book upwards and downwards. And
Yeah.
because they wouldn't change the style, they wouldn't stop using Gulf of Mexico. They got booted from the White House press pool. Very blatant viewpoint discrimination. You either agree with the administration, you use its words and phrases that it prefers,
Yeah.
or you are going to risk punishment. And
Well,
that's
and
a
Nico,
flagrant affront of the First Amendment.
and I'm so glad the Associated Press decided to fight this case. And to me, it underlines how shameful it is that Paramount settled that case.
Mhm.
And if we can talk about that a little bit, and in that ABC, Paramount, they just see this as the price of doing business. And what makes it even more disturbing in the Paramount case is because they see a media deal coming up. And what's concerning about that is that there are other media companies that have their own media deals coming up. And it just makes you wonder how much pressure is being brought to bear on these news organizations via their parent companies because because Trump has figured out, okay, I have a pressure point here. I just have to push on that pressure point, and I can get the desired response. And to me, that's scary shit because A, he can control what is reported in terms of the news coverage.
Mhm.
He can get things softened down. And B, we're never going to know about it unless somebody on the inside of one of these news organizations says, "Aha, yeah, I got a call from an executive producer who got a call from the president who said of the news division who said, 'Don't do this, do that,' because we're hearing from the White House." It's just
Yeah.
it's a very opaque situation.
Yeah, 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 and as you mentioned, Paramount wanted to merge with Skydance Media,
Guidance, yeah.
and it needed FCC and other regulatory approval to do so. And here, I think they made the calculated choice to say the cost of doing business here is $16 million to get this deal through.
Yeah.
Remembering, of course, that the Trump lawsuit was in his personal capacity, right? So here you have a president in his personal capacity suing a news organization on a claim that everyone in the First Amendment community views as frivolous, that news organizations in any other circumstance would have continued to fight, feeling like
Yeah,
they need to settle in order to do business in this country. That's how you do business in a banana republic. That's not how you do
that's
business
right.
in the United States of America. And I will also say Trump is going after his critics, like the New York Times, that reported what I just said, that the First Amendment community thinks this is a bogus, baseless lawsuit. They threatened to go after him or after the New York Times with a tortious interference claim. So it's all
They just make
bogus
up
upside stuff.
they make up all of these legal machinations and legal methods that they think Trump talked about this during the 2016 campaign that he wanted to redo the libel laws, I think is the way he described it in
Yeah.
this country. And so essentially that's what he's been able to do by extracting these concessions from places like I'd call them bribes from ABC and CBS. He's kind of sort of rewritten the libel laws himself because he's been able to extract these concessions from these companies and affect their behavior. I mean, he's forced out the president of CBS News. And all of this just makes me wonder, couple that with what he's done to the Associated Press, the fact that he continues to refer to the press as fake news, the enemy of the people, and so on.
Mhm.
A lot of organizations like yours, Nico, that come out with the color-coded maps that show press freedom is this way in this part of the world and press freedom is this way. And if you're a dark purple like Scandinavia, you have the free press. You're good to go. You're all set. If you're in these orange colored countries, maybe not so much. It seems to me we have to reassess. I'm not saying your organization does that, but it seems to me we have to reassess what we have in this country. It seems
Yeah.
to me we don't really have what a bona fide free press anymore if the president has this kind of leverage over these very large media companies, which is basically the infrastructure that we have right now, predominantly to get information to people in this country. Am I way off base here?
Well, if the idea is that you have to sing the president's tune in order to do business as a media company in this country or to get access to the president in this country, I think you have a grave threat to the free press. And going back to Thomas Jefferson, when asked if he would rather have, a government or a free press, he said, "I'd rather have a free press than a government." I mean, that's a founding principle of the United States. The United States was founded in many ways by pamphleteers arguing it out and debating the political issues of the day. The Federalist Papers, the Anti-Federalist Papers, Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine anonymously, was serialized in newspapers and pamphlets throughout the country. It's, I think, still the most selling document in United States history by like a proportion to the population or something like
Yeah.
that. So it's deeply chilling. And you're right. I mean, the defamation laws have held largely. But what the Trump administration is doing is using these other tools, these other regulatory authorities, and the power of the office
Yes.
and all the headaches that he can and his administration can create for people
Yep.
to effectively circumvent the very strong defamation laws that we have in this country. And what he is doing, you'll recall, he came into office saying we're going to have a golden age for free speech. He came into office and many people
Uh,
voted for him because they were concerned about the efforts to police
just like his golden
misinformation.
phones and his golden fragrance too, I guess. But anyway, I don't mean to interrupt
Yeah.
again.
No, no, no. But what I'm saying is there was this concern about misinformation and how the left was policing misinformation. And I think there are valid concerns that the left went too far in policing mis and disinformation. I always worry about there being some sort of a ministry of truth
Okay,
sitting in
sure.
government.
Yeah.
But now what is he doing? He's just rebranding misinformation as news distortion or consumer fraud and weaponizing the courts to go after his political enemies. It's no different than what you might see on the left.
And I will say I saw Gavin Newsom decided he was going to file a lawsuit against Fox.
Yes.
I get it. Maybe I should say the governor is trolling people on the far right and so on, and he's trying to have a little fun with the Fox News crowd and that sort of thing. I don't think but he's a guy who's being talked about as a presidential candidate in 2028. I don't think somebody on the Democratic side of the aisle should be doing that because it sort of normalizes it, and then it becomes like, okay, this administration, they're going to sue Fox. The next administration, they're going to sue MSNBC. To me, the principle should come first, and that is, we are the United States of America in large part because of the free press. I mean, I'll throw out a quote too. Walter Cronkite used to say, and I might get this a little bit wrong, but that free press is not just important to democracy; it is democracy. It is democracy, and if you take it away, then what's to say we're just not going to have sort of an arms race of presidents going after opposing viewpoints in this country. I don't see it as I wish the governor would change his mind on that. I'll confess my unpopular opinion here. Maybe there are folks on the left who like that he did that. I don't think it's a good idea.
No, you gotta stand on principles.
Yeah,
Jon Stewart once had this great line that if you abandon your principles when the going gets tough, they're not principles, they're hobbies. And we don't
that's a
wanna
good
be
point.
free
Yeah,
speech. We don't
yeah,
wanna be free speech hobbyists. We don't wanna be free press hobbyists. We need to stand on these principles, even if our ideological opponents are willing to go to the gutter and abandon them themselves. I
yeah,
will say, yes. I mean, I'm not here to hold water for the press. I think it does great work. Sometimes it falls short. Often, when it does fall short, the nice thing about it is that it will correct itself
yeah,
if it is reputable. That you see corrections on all these major daily newspapers.
yeah.
But as was said during the McCarthy era, uh, yeah, on one of the big national broadcasts, we are not descended from fearful men. One of the jobs of the free
That's
press
right.
is to hold those in power accountable. The McCarthy era and its persecutions ended because the press stood up. It finally
Yeah,
decided that it was going to grow a backbone and that it was going to call out the McCarthy hearings and it was going to call out the persecution
yeah.
of people alleged to be communists or sympathizers with
Well,
communists.
and part of that is because during that period, I mean, I know I worked at CBS News many years ago in the early 2000s, and there were old enough folks there at the time who explained to me, Jim, it wasn't always the case that you had these giant corporations own places like CBS and make our lives a living hell and got in the way of us doing the news. There was a time when you had people like Cronkite and Burrow, and those guys just decided what the news was. They just did. And I'm not putting them up on a pedestal. I guess maybe I am putting them up on the pedestal a little bit, but I sure as hell trust Dan Rather and Walter Cronkite way more than I trust Shari Redstone. That's for damn sure. And my question is now is that, and I've written about this, is whether the system that we have for delivering information in this country is essentially broken. You have newspapers like the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos. They're afraid to put out an editorial right before the election endorsing Kamala Harris. I mean, that is a crock right there. You have these media companies that are just completely bending the knee to Donald Trump. And do we need something more like the BBC in this country? I mean, to me, where you stand up public broadcasting to the extent that it can't be monkeyed with by these, you know, bad faith people in DC. I'm trying my best to not use curse words with these two very
You use more
thoughtful
curse
guests today. But Nico, your thoughts on that, Nico, because I get fired up about this because I've worked in this business. And to me, the business is largely broken. It's just broken.
Yeah, well, I mean, you do have institutions like Substack right now, which have taken a strong stand in support of free speech principles. We're
Mm,
working with them to
yeah. No,
offer up
and hey, I love these guys, here I am,
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
we're working with Substack right now to
yeah,
offer representation to
yeah,
writers who might face targeting or persecution from the administration. So Substack's a great new media outlet for folks who want to stand up for free speech principles. I do worry about state sponsored or state funded media. I mean, you're seeing
Mm.
right now, even with the funding of PBS and NPR, the administration trying to defund them. So,
Yeah.
if you're standing these up to prevent the administration from monkeying around with the news business, well, the
Yeah.
monkeying around is already happening with those
y-
institutions that do have some connection to the federal government. So I'm not sure that's the right approach, although I think you need
Yeah.
to have a multiplicity of approaches. But the main approach you need is
I just think
a
right now, like
populist.
PBS, when I watch PBS here in Washington, I don't mean to interrupt, but I get passionate about this. When I watch, and I love PBS, love WETA, I love public broadcasting, I love NPR. But when PBS has to air news at 5 o'clock in the evening before the news hour comes on at 6 o'clock, it's partly because they don't have the resources to put on multiple hours of news over at PBS, and they should, for God's sake. I mean, it doesn't have to be like, a carbon copy of what they do at the BBC, but I wish they were a bit more robust in this country. But I didn't mean to interrupt, but thank you.
No, no, no.
Yeah.
I didn't have much more to say other than as I see a number of your viewers commenting right now, support NPR and PBS if that's the
Yeah.
media that you like. We got into this
Yeah.
trend over the last 4 decades where we could just expect our news for free. Again, Substack is helping
True.
to create that subscription model. I'm a subscriber to PBS. I love its documentaries. My wife and I watch them before we go to bed. I'm watching
Yeah.
one on Hannah Arendt right now. I just got done watching one on William F. Buckley. It would have been his 100th birthday
Oh, I gotta
this year. I
watch
love
that one. That looks great. Yeah.
yeah, it was done by this director Brock Goodman, who I really like. He did a documentary on Woodstock, which was absolutely fantastic. So I urge your listeners
Mm.
to check all that out. But support the media that you enjoy, support the media that you
Yeah.
appreciate. But the larger principle here, Jim, is that we need to support the rights of the press and we need to support the rights of individuals to speak freely. And it's not just, and this is the most important point, it's not just those people that we agree with, the news outlets that we might agree with, for example,
Yeah.
like CBS or like CNN or like your news outlet that you're starting up here. We also got to defend the rights of those we might vehemently hate. So you mentioned Gavin Newsom suing Fox News. Let's stand up for Fox News in
Yeah.
that point. Let's stand on principle, and then we
Yeah.
get called hypocrites down the line. If we like these democratic values, if we appreciate these democratic values, if we think like Thomas Jefferson that a free press is essential to this country, then we need to stand by it. I see people saying there is no supporting Fox News, no Fox News. Yeah, I get it, folks. I get it.
Yeah.
But the civil libertarian, the Constitution rests on neutral principles. The same rights that Fox News enjoys are the same rights that CNN enjoys. And if we only defend them for CNN and we don't defend them for Fox, then we undermine the
Yeah.
values of those rights.
No, I totally agree with you, and I think Jesse Waters and Greg Gutfeld and those guys are completely full of shit. I mean, they're just completely full of shit, and they're not news people. But I will say, I don't want them to be sued and gone after by the president of the United States. Now, if Dominion Voting wants to sue Fox because they've been defamed, hey, that's as we saw during the 2020 election, debacle, conspiracy theory debacle that we saw with all of that. That's the free market at work here. But Donald Trump, the president of the United States, doing this sort of thing, to me, it's just patently un-American. It's just un-American on its face. It's not who we
Yeah.
are as a country. And these big companies like Paramount and Disney have contributed to the weakening of this country. And the way I look at it, I mean, to me, it's
Yeah.
just objectively looking at it is what it is.
Well, the ABC case is interesting. I see some of your
Yeah,
listeners saying, "Well, discuss any difference you see between CBS and ABC." In the
yeah,
ABC case, folks might recall George Stephanopoulos mentioned that Trump was found liable for rape, and in New York state law, he was actually found liable for, I think it's called sexual abuse. It's not actually
exactly. Yeah,
rape.
right.
It's a weird sort of liability, but apparently one of George Stephanopoulos' producers told him before he went on air that Trump was found liable for sexual abuse and not rape. So I think
Yeah,
there's probably a more colorable defamation claim that you have there
yeah.
because you
Although
in order to
there was a, not to start splitting hairs and dancing on the head of the pin, but there was a judge. I think the judge in that case had also weighed in on whether it met the legal definition of rape, and there was just sort of anyway, not to go down that road, but yeah,
No, that's true. The judge had weighed
yeah,
in and said, colloquially, more or less,
colloquially,
this would have been called rape, but under New York
yeah,
civil law, and this was a civil case, not a criminal
yeah.
case. Uh, it
Yeah,
was sexual abuse.
I'm not here to defend George or any of those things. Just to me, when you have these companies one after another doing what they've done, I know Donald Trump. I covered him. I know exactly what he's thinking. He's
See, it's
thinking,
one of your biggest fans, Jim.
yeah, he's one of my big, but he's thinking, I can keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing it because look, I got away with it. The AP, I got away with it with ABC. I got away with it at CBS. I don't like what they write. I don't like what they say. And look at the way he went after Natasha Bertrand, my former colleague. They go after people for essentially telling the truth. And when it's something he doesn't like. And he admitted to Leslie Stahl at one point that I call it fake news because I just want people to not believe what the press is saying. And he just sees
Yeah.
it as part of business. He has no regard for the press or the First Amendment or this thing that I like to call the American way of life. But Nico, great conversation. Really appreciate you coming on, and please check out Nico. Are you on Substack yourself?
Yes, I am. So the podcast that you had mentioned at the top, so to
Yeah.
speak, the free speech podcast, which I've been doing for almost a decade now. It's hard to believe. I didn't know
Oh,
there were so many
wonderful. Good for
free
you.
speech topics that you could talk about over a decade. But yeah, my podcast, so to speak, the free speech podcast, is on Substack, so folks can check it out there. The organization is the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, the fire.org. We've been at this for 25 years.
Yeah.
Mostly on college campuses for most of our history. And then in 2022, we expanded off campus. But a lot of that time was spent defending conservatives on college campuses when they were getting censored. Because the,
Remember
the,
that?
the, yeah, the users of censorship.
Yeah. And now they want to go after progressives for having points of view they don't like. And if that progressive has a documentation issue, immigration documentation issue, they're going to try to kick you out of the country
Yes, yeah.
because of your viewpoint.
If you write an op-ed, if you're Ramesh Ozturk at Tufts University, you write an op-ed calling for your university to defund from Israel, your visa's on the line. You could get kicked out of
Yeah.
the country. Now, fortunately, the court stepped in there, and she's still in the country, but
Yeah.
that's the risk. And so we joined arms with conservatives over the last
Yeah.
decade when we saw conservative censorship on campus.
Yeah.
But now we've lost a lot of allies, donors, friends, because we're willing to call a spade and say the Trump administration is doing some of the exact same things that we saw on campus, and they're doing it at scope, scale, and severity, using the power of the federal government in a way that we
Yeah.
haven't seen before. We didn't even talk about Harvard, but we could go long on what's happening at
Man, oh
Harvard,
man.
which is
We'll do it again.
yeah.
Nico, and did I say your last name correctly? It does it sound
Perino.
like one of my favorite beers out there? Is it?
Uh, yeah, Peroni. I love Peronis. Yeah, I think the Italians would pronounce my last name Perino, but Nico
Oh, okay, very
Perrino.
good. Well, Nico, great to have you on. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And thanks for tolerating my dad jokes as well. But thanks for the time and for standing
Oh,
up
it
for
was
what you do. We appreciate it.
my wife is 40 weeks pregnant. I've got 2 kids,
Oh,
another
wow.
on the way, so I have my fair share of dad jokes as well.
You better get going. All right. Thanks, Nico. Best of luck. Don't forget, if you missed the top of the show, you can watch the recording later on Substack. You can also watch it on YouTube. You can listen to it on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Lots of different ways. And in the meantime, still reporting from Washington, I'm Jim Acosta. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.